Jane, my old friend. It's so nice to see you again.
It feels like it's 2017, 2018 all
I
over
know.
again. Here we are. We're still here.
We're still here. We're still
The
making
OG
podcasts.
listeners will be able to reflect on this, that
We'll
we've both
very
been around
much
a long time.
understand. I'll never forget the first podcast we did, and we had listeners write us being like, I'm so relieved. I thought you guys didn't like each other, like, because you're competitors, And we were like, no, we love each other. What are you guys talking about?
I know. I think some people want to put a sort of conflict into every
Yeah.
scenario, but yeah, I'm cheering on every other like podcaster because it's, as we were just saying off air, it's always been tough and it's still tough now,
Yeah.
to make an impact. But yeah, I love what you're
Fingers.
doing with your show. So more power to your elbow.
Thank you. Well, it's been a minute since you've been on the podcast, so I'm so
Yeah,
excited to dive into poisonous plants and all of that. But I want a catch up with you for the
sure.
audience members too, who miss you as much as I do. So, what have you been up to since we last spoke? How's life?
Well, this is, yeah, it's been a moment.
Yeah.
Well, I started a new job in November of last year. I'd been freelancing for 7 years, and obviously a lot of that during that, well, in fact, all of that time, making my podcast On the Ledge about houseplants. And then I got to the stage where I needed a new challenge. I was kind of lonely, to be honest, working
It's very
on my
lonely.
own. You know what this is like. It's a lonely life, really, and people sort of see you kind of on social media and stuff. They don't realize that you're literally sat at your desk editing and
Hmm.
emailing and writing all the time. So I wanted to work with a team of people. So I got my job. I mean, I have a great job title, Head of Inspiration. What a great job title.
So good.
At an app called Scribehound Gardening. So we're a kind of a home for garden writing. We have a load of creators and writers who, some of whom are household names in the UK, like Alan Titchmarsh and Sarah Raven, and lots of us who have specialties of different kinds. And I sort of head up that team and help them to get the best out of their copy. And we also, every article is read, so it's kind of like a podcast a day as well. So it's huge fun. I do that for 4 days a week, and somehow I think I'd got the book finished before I started that job, but now the book that I wrote just before I started that job is coming out. So it's been quite a year, actually. My dog Wolfie died just before I
Wolfie.
started the job, which listeners to my podcast will know. He was
Yeah.
podcast mascot, but he did not last past 2024. So yes, that was very sad. But
He lived a long, beautiful
yeah,
life.
he was 14, so he did really
Yeah.
well, and he was lovely. And I mean, I'm going to get tearful if I go on too much, but the thing that I was kind of proud of was that we all four of us were there the day we went to pick him up when he was 4, and on the day he went, all four of us were there. My children came along. I don't think they really knew what they were letting themselves in for, but they were brilliant and they were all there. So that was really wonderful. And yes, he is often talked about and remembered in our household. So yeah, pets are precious, as we know.
You've had a lot of chapters closing and chapters opening this year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and also I think I'm coming into my houseplant phase where I've kind of ended the collector mentality very much, in that the last year I have had so little time to do houseplant stuff. So I can't now have plants that are not pulling their weight, if I can put it that way. So, I've got rid of a lot of plants that just weren't working for me, and thinking to myself, actually, do I really want this one? No, I'm going to give it away, or in some cases compost it if it had
Hmm.
pests. It's onto the compost heap. The great circle of life.
Yes.
But yeah, I've just been trying to kind of simplify and streamline my houseplant collection, which is an ongoing challenge. It'll be interesting to see where that ends up, really. I'm also doing my main thing is everything's like mass planted. So now all my snake plants, and I probably have about 20 different snake plants, are all in a massive dish.
Cool.
One massive dish in the front room. So yeah, making life simpler through
Making life simpler.
containerizing and just making sure everything's grouped together. So
Well,
yeah,
I'm happy
it's
you
been a
said
year.
that because I think, we're both looking at 8 years from when we've started our podcast. Our podcast
Hmm.
started like around the same time. We've been podcasting about houseplants. We've been talking about houseplants. Like, it's kind of almost crazy to think that you might still have the same collection, yet people expect that. And I think really your collection and your interest changes over the seasons. And it makes so much sense to me that you're in a season now of like, yeah, I'm not the collector anymore. I am streamlining. And that's how I'm maintaining joy with houseplants instead of letting it tip over and being like, I hate all my houseplants now. Like, instead you go with the change, which I think is really important. And I think a lot of people who got really collectory in 2020, 2021, and then had to go back to their lives in 2022, 2023, go back to the office, have gone through that transition of being like, wait, no, I used to be a curious collector plant parent and now I'm a total low maintenance plant parent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I just feel like now I can try to have fewer houseplants, but I really enjoy them. And they're all things that are extremely low maintenance.
Yeah.
And things that go outside for the summer. My Chinese money plant is still outside, even though it's getting down to like maybe about 10 degrees centigrade outside at night. So, but it's fine. I'll bring it in eventually, but I'm just trying to like make things simpler and recognizing that right now, where I am right now, I just don't have time for a lot of complex plans. I mean, I have kind of got into terrariums more, which is kind of funny because that's where I very started as a child.
Yeah.
So I've got more into terrariums and just things that don't need much attention. But and also my children have kind of got more into plants as well. So I bought my son, gosh, what have I done? I should do a Hail Mary or something. I've bought my son a Venus flytrap. So,
boy, all right, best of luck, sir.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But I have set it up with a grow light on a timer, on a 12-hour timer. So I'm going to try in my the previous. Actually, that's another thing, that there's a self-published version of this coming out, Legends of the Leaf. So I've been looking back at this book as well. And in this book, I talk about Venus flytraps and about the fact that some growers now do not give them a dormant period over the winter. They let them grow on under grow lights indoors. So that's what I'm trying with this particular plant and seeing how it goes, which I've never done before. So we shall see. But I do need to water it. I must get some water for it after this. Some rainwater.
Yeah. Good reminder. Good reminder.
Yes.
How has it been for you to transition from being predominantly, I mean, I know you've always been a journalist and a writer, but for many years you were predominantly audio and now you're predominantly writing. How has that transition been for you?
I still love both. I mean, I've just been doing the audiobook for the new book, which is, if you want a way of killing your love for audio, it's recording, editing and producing your own audiobook all by yourself. So I mean, that's where I come from. I come from a writing background, so for me it's kind of core thing that I love to do. So it's really nice. I mean, I would love to just be sitting all day doing work like I did for this book and the previous one, just doing research and writing. Would be fantastic. Unfortunately, probably wouldn't pay the bills, but yeah, I do love turning a word is a wonderful thing. But audio's got its own magic as well. And I know probably you felt the same about your voice at one point or other, where you feel that you hate your voice. I'm so over that hating my voice thing now. I've realized that I love the ability to use my voice in different ways. So that's quite powerful. That wasn't a very clear answer, was it? I like both. What can I say?
Yeah. I feel like in this day and age, like I'm over critiquing myself in every capacity, like whether it's videos, whether it's, the double chin that I see sometimes in a video, or whether it's however my voice is that day, or, if I'm sick and I have to record an ad or something like that. Life is too short. The world is too crazy. Like, you got to love yourself. You got to be kind to yourself. No one else is going to be kind to you,
So true. And, try not to live up to ridiculous standards, because
totally,
it's probably not real, like what you're trying to live up to. And we're all just sacks of water rolling around on this planet trying to survive, right?
100%. So with that, speaking of surviving, I was surprised when you told me the topic of your next book, Poisonous Plants. There's barely a houseplant to be seen in this book, Jane.
No, there's not many houseplants.
I'm so curious, like why poisonous plants? Like, tell me the journey to writing this book.
Somebody asked me to write it. And
Somebody
I said
asked
yes.
you to write it. Okay, cool.
But it actually was really nice, because So I don't know if audience members may or may not know what happened with this book. We should probably just say a little bit about this, if I may.
Yes, Legends of the
Just
Leaf.
Legends of the Leaf. I should say a little bit about this because lots of your listeners probably donated money to this, and I'm really proud of this book, Legends of the Leaf.
It's an amazing book.
When I reread it recently, because I'm preparing to self-publish it, I was like, this is actually quite good. But
Very good.
Unfortunately,
very thoroughly researched.
Unfortunately, my side of it was all great, and I'm very, very pleased with the book. However, the publisher that I used, Unbound, they basically went bust, owing me and many other writers money. Now, I was not hugely out of pocket. If you look on my website, there's a blog post where I tell you exactly to the penny what I lost. But it was just the fact that the book never really got a chance to bloom and meet the market that it needed to meet. And it was kind of a sad ending. I mean, it's kind of like a phoenix from the ashes, though, because I have the rights back and I am republishing it, and it should be out very soon with a new cover and a new foreword written by my friend Tony LeBritton. So that's really exciting. So that's coming out soon, but I don't know exactly when.
For you. I know that was so devastating, and people don't understand, like, a book writing process is like 2 years. And for your book to come out and then have it not even get the chance to succeed is devastating. And I'm so happy you were able to get the rights back and republish it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a question of even getting the rights back. I got the rights back because they breached their contract.
With your publisher. Yeah,
I mean, if you want to go down an Unbound rabbit hole, you can go and read all about it in various places, what happened. There were authors who were down thousands of pounds. I think the highest figure I saw was £75,000. So, like, it's not, people's mental health and livelihoods have been affected. So it's a really big thing. I escaped very lightly. My book came out. I was only owed a few £100, which, like, is not an insignificant amount of money, and I'd very much like to get it, but I'm not going to get it. But it's just more about I felt that people were let down. However, self-publishing will mean that for the first time this book will be available in the US properly. Like, if you go online, you will be able to order it in the US and get a copy without paying $1 million of postage. I do actually have a few copies of this original one. It won't be quite the same as the hardback because it's self-published, but if anyone does want a hardback version, I do have a few copies left. But the new version will be super cool, so that's exciting. But yeah, the Atlas of Deadly Plants, this is a different story. I mean, I'm holding it up here. It's a beast. It's like...
Yes. It's an atlas.
It's an atlas. Yeah, it's got gold foil on the front. I like the foil. We've got the foil theme. And so I was asked to write this book by Greenfinch, a publisher in the UK. And, you know, you do get some of these kind of, I have had these kind of requests before to write books. And I've often said no, because I'm like, I'm not that interested, or that's not what I want to do. But this book, immediately they were like poisonous plants. And I thought, that actually sounds really up my street.
Yeah.
So I just jumped at the chance to write it because it's 50 plants profiled from around the world, and in a way it's a bit like Legends of the Leaf in that we're kind of digging into backstories and finding out how these plants were used and all of that sweet jazz that you can dig into. So it was a really fun book to write, and I'm really pleased with how it's turned out.
Yeah, it's so fun. And the fact that it's being released in October, you know, Halloween,
yes, it's
poison.
Ready for Halloween, spooky.
Yeah, very spooky. So it's for, you know, it kind of reminded me too. Do you know David Dominy? He's an English gardener. He came out with a book last year on plants with superpowers.
Yes.
Plants that have like interesting things. It kind of reminded me of that book where like these plants have profiles, and you really do learn a lot of fun facts that you can go tell at parties, you know, like with all of your profiles too. I love that it's broken down by region. I guess my first question is, what makes a plant poisonous?
That's a really good question. I mean, the plants in this book, not all of them, I mean, they really vary, because you've got 2 plants in this book that are classified as biological weapons under the UN Weapons Convention. So that's kind of that's like high level serious stuff. Like, right, you're not messing with this. And then you've got things like poison ivy, which like is very, very unlikely to kill you, but is very, very likely to cause you massive amounts of pain and distress. So like there's different ways of interpreting poisonous. You also have plants that are very, very poisonous, but rarely cause poisonings. Either because these days, in the past, when digging back in the archives, you realise that, yeah, in the past, we were really, really prone to being poisoned, especially children. I mean, like, there's so many Victorian children that I read about who, you know, 2 and 3 year olds off running about, playing, foraging by the side of a river, and they pull out a root and they think it's a parsnip and they start eating it, and oh dear, it's not a parsnip.
Yeah.
It's water hemlock or something really poisonous. So these days our children are much less likely to be running around without parental supervision. So generally there's plants that are quite poisonous that rarely poison us and rarely kill people these days. But there are some plants in the book that, you know, come under different categories. There's a plant called manchineel, which is a tree which grows in the Caribbean and Florida. And this particular plant is a member of the euphorbia family. So we all know poinsettias, and they have this milky latex in them, or the euphorbias that we grow as succulents. And they have this milky latex, which is extremely potent, to the extent that you can stand under this tree in a rainstorm and you will suffer from terrible blisters and burning. And unfortunately, the apple-like fruits, there's a long history of people, you know, they're on holiday, they're all relaxed, having a lovely time, and they think they see this apple that's on the beach, and they think, oh, that looks tasty, and they either bite into it, or more unfortunately, possibly, they stick it in their swimming shorts to walk back along the beach, and then they get a terrible skin reaction, blistering, burning. So there's different ways that plants can get you, but there's many different methods that they will use to take you out. It's not necessarily, I mean, I say in the introduction, very few plant poisonings involve, like, as you see in the movies. You know, in the movies it's like, oh my gosh, they've taken the deadly blah blah blah, and then 2 seconds later it's like, blonk, yeah, they're dead. Totally. Like that totally. Is from reading many scientific papers about plant poisonings. Most plant poisonings start with gastrointestinal symptoms, which you probably mistake for food poisoning or a bug, and then progress on to other things from there. Very few of them are very quick. Most of them, you know, it's going to be several minutes / hours, even days in the case of some of the fungi. So, yeah, it makes identifying what you've been poisoned with rather difficult. But, yeah, I mean, it's made me even more conscious when I'm foraging of getting the right identification for things, because you know how badly wrong it can go.
Yeah, really, I mean, at this point, I feel like from everything I've read about mushrooms and plants, foraging just feels so scary to me. I mean, I definitely want to have a forager on to, like, talk about proper foraging practices, but you could just go one mistake can wreck your liver. But okay, so I want to go through a couple of different groups of plants that you were talking about. The first one that I was really surprised to see in your atlas were plants that I don't know as poisonous plants. I know as medicinal plants. You have ayahuasca, you have peyote, you have tobacco in there. So talk to me about those plants, their profiles, and why they made the list.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's really interesting trying to compile a list, because on what basis are you choosing these plants? Obviously, you know, I talk in the introduction to the book about the quote from Paracelsus, who said that poison is the dose, right? So we may not think we understand that quote, but actually we do. Like, if you've ever had a headache and you've taken a couple of headache pills to get your headache to go away, you don't think to yourself, well, if I took 50 of these, I'd feel 50 times better. You realise that actually the correct dosage of those tablets is actually vital for curing your headache, and that if you do take too many, then you're going to poison yourself. So many of these plants count as both psychoactive or medicinal and can be poisonous at a particular dose. So yeah, those two plants, ayahuasca and peyote, yes, again, lots of associations with people going on trips and having hallucinations and so on. But again, it's all in the dosage. So if you take too much of that, yes, you're going to die. Obviously, what I emphasize in the book is that if you are embedded in the cultures which have historically used those two plants for different purposes to in religious and cultural contexts, then you're probably going to be in many ways prepared for what's going to happen when you take that substance. The danger comes where you get tourists coming in and thinking, that they can take these substances without any of the preparation or the understanding of dosage, etc., that indigenous communities have had historically using these plants. That's where it gets dangerous. That's where the problem comes in, where you get people who take these psychoactive plants outside of the context in which they've been historically used, and that's when problems are more likely to happen. As I say, not all of these plants have killed millions of people. Tobacco, on the other hand, has killed millions of people around the world. Again, the context of tobacco and the use by indigenous peoples is important, and again, like that needs to be protected, because that is very different from the kind of the capitalist system of tobacco use, etc. So that was a difficult chapter to write, because as you can imagine, whole books have been written about the tobacco plant, and trying to telescope that down into a couple of thousand words was really tough. But one of the things that I realized writing it was, there's a reason why tobacco is one of the most researched plants in the world, and it's because cha-ching, pound signs, like it's worth a lot of money, and so the amount of research into each of these plants is very varied depending on its economic
that's a good point.
Economic ability to make people money. So something like tobacco, I think it was the first plant to be genetically modified. There's so much research into it because of all of the reasons we know, to do with the multi-million-pound tobacco industry. But a plant like, the two bioweapons I talked about, so ricin.
That was going to be my next question. Tell me about these bioweapons.
So these two plants are both classified as bioweapons, biological weapons, and they are mainly used. It's mainly the seed that is the source of these poisons. So one of them is ricin, Ricinus communis, the castor oil plant, and the other is the rosary pea, which is Abrus precatorius. So the thing about these is that one of them is much more poisonous than the other. But it's not the same plant that is actually the one that's used and scares people. And it's all down to supply and availability. Ricinus communis is a very popular and well-distributed plant around the world because it produces lots of things that we use in our daily lives, not least castor oil, which is created by mashing up the seeds. The byproduct of that process is this mash, which can then be made into ricin, which is a biological weapon. So the fact that you've got all this byproduct hanging around, it's also a plant that's I don't know about where you are in Florida, but it's a really popular garden plant in the UK. It's grown, you can buy the seeds of it very easily through seed websites, and it's planted in parks and gardens all over the country. So it's a very popular plant. It's actually, I think, about 4 times less poisonous than Abrus precatorius, but it's just much more available. So you don't ever hear about Abrin terror attacks because it just isn't, you wouldn't be able to get hold of the materials, whereas Ricinus communis is very available for terrorists to grab the materials and make ricin. So Abrus precatorius is a plant that kind of is like quite a few plants in the book. It is kind of a plant that sort of scrambles around wasteland and what we would call ruderal areas, which is a fancy word for places where there's been human disturbance but humans aren't at present. So it might be waste ground, it might be a rubbish heap, it might be the side of a road. So that plant grows through all kinds of environments but isn't grown on a commercial scale. So you don't get Abrin used as a biological weapon as much. So two really, really interesting plants with very, very similar chemical makeup and very similar potential to harm, but used in very different ways.
How does it get characterized as a biological weapon?
Well, because it's just so potent. So the famous ricin attack was on a Bulgarian dissident called Georgy Markov, who got injected with a metal pellet that had a tiny teeny amount of ricin in it into his leg and died. So it's something, it's just so potent. Its effect on the body is so potent that it doesn't take much.
And it's been used in kind of warfare.
And it's been used yeah, it's been used by terrorists in various ways as a tool to kill people.
Wow.
And also just terrorist acts. So I don't know if you remember, there was a few years ago, there was somebody was sending letters to American politicians with ricin powder in them.
Is that, wait, anthrax?
Yeah, no, that's different. But the ricin powder, the idea is you don't even necessarily need to send many of these letters, if any, to terrorize everybody into thinking that every letter they open is going to be containing ricin. So it's been used in all kinds of ways. But on the whole, ricin is an amazing, Ricinus communis rather, the plant is just this amazing plant that has many uses. It's just
castor oil is like a very popular wellness trend these days.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the real thing. The knowledge of which parts of the plant and what you can do to the plant in order to use it is something that's absolutely vital. And that's why there's a warning at the front of this book saying, if a plant's been used as a traditional medicine, don't go and try it out, because actually, again, you're torn away from the context and the setting, and also you don't know what the dosage and how it would be prepared. There's so many factors. So we all need to be a little bit sensible when it comes to it's wonderful to think about using medicinal plants to cure us all, but at the same time, some of these plants are really dangerous.
No plants in an atlas of deadly plants should you be playing around with. Let's just put that. Yeah, leave these plants alone, plant friends.
Yeah, I mean, there's a term which I've totally forgotten now, but there's a term which tells you, which is about, a lot of these plants are not medicines because the range that it takes to get from medicinal to poisonous is really small. There's a word for it which totally left my mind, but basically, it's dangerous to have a medicine where if you take slightly too much, you're going to be poisoned.
Yeah,
right. That's really quite dangerous. So a lot of these drugs that were used in the past have fallen out of use for that reason, because they are just too easy to overdose on. Or in some cases, synthetic alternatives have been found and so on. But yeah, you realise that, people are nostalgic for the past, but having written this book, I'm like, gosh, it wasn't that great. A lot of these things, we worked out how they were poisonous because people, and it really is a wide range of people, from doctors to just interested individuals, and again, don't try this at home, folks, would literally okay, I'm going to take one bite of this and see what happens and record my symptoms. Gosh. Okay, I'm okay now. So the next day they're going to double the dose, and then they're going to record. I'm trying to remember which plant it is now. There's one of the plants in the book where this scientist did this every day, increasing the dose, and felt worse and worse every time, and then they ended up having to drink their shaving water to make themselves throw up because they realized I've gone a bit far now. And the most famous person in the book, well, there's two famous people in the book who did this. One of them is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, so the author of Sherlock Holmes. He, as a young medical student, he wrote to the British Medical Journal about his experiments with something called gelsemium, which is from a plant called the heartbreak grass, or in fact one of its close relatives. And again, he started taking it and then increased the dose. And it's like, the description of it is, let me see if I can find it. The description of it is just like, what were you doing?
Right. What were you thinking? Also, I wonder if did the plant make it into any of his stories, his Sherlock Holmes stories?
No, funnily enough, I don't think it did. But yeah, this was quite a common thing at the time for people to say, okay, I'm just going to test this out.
Let me just play around with this poisonous plant and see.
Wow. I'm just glad that other people did that for me, because
that's a level of bravery I don't have.
I can't find the page. But yeah, it's a fascinating story, and he did his bit for science, because we learnt that you couldn't take over a certain dose of this plant, otherwise. I remember he had horrific diarrhea. That was one of the symptoms. Just like, what are you doing, man? You're an idiot.
Right. What are you doing? That's fascinating. Okay, so we've got biological weapons, we've got plant medicines.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other plants that surprised you? Because it sounds
Well,
like you found in your research a lot of great stories.
yeah, I really loved researching Lords and Ladies,
Okay.
Arum maculatum. I mean, the illustration for that plant is a little bit, I mean, it really does the job in terms of telling you the story. I don't even know if I can find it now. Basically, if you've ever seen this plant, it's a little bit of a phallic symbol, right?
Okay.
So it's an aroid. So houseplant listeners will be familiar with the spade and spadix form of the
Okay.
aroids, and this is exactly that. It grows in the UK and other parts of Europe, and you get this hooded structure coming up, and inside is the spadix, which is the central spike, and it attracts flies in to pollinate it, and it is poisonous, but there's so many different uses for this plant. I mean, the list was crazily long how many things we use this plant for. So I found two separate edible uses for the plant. In Syria, the leaves, I think it was the leaves, were used to make a soup called loof, which is a really important soup, as in I think it's got its own sort of local regional title because it's such an important thing. Yeah, so in the eastern Mediterranean provinces of Turkey, the leaves are used for a soup known as tursik, I've probably got that wrong, which is the Turkish name for the plant. And in Syria, the leaves are the main ingredients of another soup called loof. So yeah, don't eat the leaf. Don't try this at home again because, they've probably got a very specific way of preparing those leaves.
Preparing it.
But, the tubers were also used in the UK to make starch because they're very starchy. And then Elizabethan ruffs, the collar, big stiff collars that people had in Tudor times were stiffened using this stuff. All kinds of things that people were doing with this plant, which if you live in Europe, you'll just see growing on in hedgerows and along the side of the road. It had so many connotations, so many names, a lot of them a bit rude. A lot of rude names because of the sort of the formation of the plant. So the Victorians, being the Victorians, decided to try to make it all sort of clean again. So they called it Our Lord and Our Lady and pretended that the spadix looked like the baby Jesus lying in the cradle or something. Obviously, people weren't falling for that. Because everyone wants to call it. And there's a lot of names that to do with dragons and all kinds of things. But, just a really curious plant that is just so common. Everyone in the UK would know that plant and recognise it, but not probably ever thought about what it was used for. And as I say, it's just sitting there and probably just doing very little now for us. But in the past, it was an extremely well used plant for all kinds of different purposes. And also very poisonous. The little red berries that come after the pollination, kids pick those and get poisoned. So yes.
Yeah. Were there any plants that came up that you were like, whoa, more people need to know about this plant because it's widely available or widely used?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's difficult because as soon as you get, like in the UK, this happens periodically, you'll get a scare about a particular plant and then everyone will go nuts about it. And then a few years later, the same scare will happen and you realise that people really don't listen. People are really, unfortunately, unaware of a lot of things to do with plants and people just don't listen to warnings. So giant hogweed, which is a very dramatic and huge plant, is very, very injurious if you get the sap on your skin. So there's every few years there'll be a giant hogweed horror story. It's also an invasive species here, so people think it's the devil. In the past, when kids used to go out and play on their own, you'd get kids turning the hollow stems into like blowpipes and things, and then they'd like burn all their faces.
Oh no.
But like there's quite often like big campaigns in the papers saying, oh, these triffids are killing us and all this. Nobody, it still happens every few years that people get poisoned by this plant because it's kind of a cool plant to look at, and people want to chop it down and then they get covered in it and pay the price. So yeah, it's difficult to say because however much you educate people, I think there's always going to be that one person. The manchineel, so going back to that one, these poisonous apple-shaped fruits on the tree. In the Caribbean, if you go on a Caribbean holiday, they will have big warnings on these trees saying don't touch. People will still do it.
That reminds me, did you watch White Lotus?
No, I haven't. I only just started watching it the other week.
It's a great
But
show.
I heard there was some kind of poisoning in there. Was there? Was it?
Yeah, the last season, there's a plant. There's a there's a poisonous plant involved in the last season. I won't give too many spoilers, but yeah, no, it's so interesting.
I'll be watching. The trouble is, I'll be watching that, and I'll be like, no, that's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just so.
Yeah.
One of the other popular culture references in the book that may ring bells with people is, and actually this might be one of my, well, I think it's my favourite illustration actually, and it's maybe my favourite chapter because I love this plant, is Lily of the Valley.
Yeah.
So Lily of the Valley is, really quite toxic, and I just love the illustration that the illustrator Alice Smith did. I don't have any tattoos, but I'm seriously thinking that would make a gorgeous tattoo.
It would make a sick tattoo. For those listening, it's a bouquet of Lily of the Valley flowers wrapped in a heart and a hammer.
Yeah, there's a hammer and chain wrapped around this heart. It's very dramatic and very gothic and very cool.
That would be a very cool tattoo.
I went on the rabbit hole. So Christian Dior, the French fashion designer, he loved this plant. Now the French generally love this plant. They have a whole day on the 1st of May on their Labor Day holiday when they, exchange bouquets of muguet, as they call it, the lily of the valley. And Christian Dior was particularly in love with this plant, and he did everything with it. It was a motif that featured in his fashion. He would give his seamstresses bouquets of it. He would sew dried lily of the valley into the hems of dresses. He had his signature perfume Diarissimo was lily of the valley, although I'll come back to that, why that's interesting, in a minute. But when he died, I went on a massive rabbit hole about Christian Dior's funeral. His coffin was literally covered in lily of the valley. Amazing photos. You can look them up online. The photos are just incredible. Set against black organza. So he had all these white blooms and the coffin was just covered in them. And this was obviously because he loved this flower. This was his flower that he really, it meant everything to him. So yeah, and again, go and look at the photos. There's a young Yves Saint Laurent in the photos who ended up taking over from Christian Dior. It's just, if you love that era, in the 50s, if you love 50s fashion, I would definitely say go and look at these photos. They're amazing. But yeah, he loved Lily of the Valley, and it's a plant that we kind of know and love and are used to seeing, but actually it is quite poisonous. And the cultural reference that modern TV watchers will know is Breaking Bad. So in Breaking Bad, Walter White, it's kind of done in a subtle way, but this kid gets poisoned and they think it's ricin, and then it turns out in the end to be Lily of the Valley. And then we see a shot of Walter White's garden with this plant growing in a pot, which actually I looked at it and went, that's so not right. It wouldn't be flat anyway.
Right, it wouldn't be growing that way. Yeah.
But anyway, it was a bit of license. But yeah, so that it turned out to be Lily of the Valley, and of course, as a chemist, he knew how to use this plant to poison this kid. So yeah, there's all these kind of modern references which come in as well. But a lot of these plants have other associations which are much more linked to the past and to. I mean, do we want to talk about some crazy witchcraft stuff?
Absolutely.
Crazy witchcraft stuff. So there's this idea that witches could fly, right? We know this. Witches have been, rightly so, to some extent, get renovated in our minds, and now being a witch is not necessarily a bad thing. Some of my closest friends are witches. But in the past, obviously, we would say the patriarchy wanted to demonize women as witches, and so there was this whole idea of ugly hag, flying on a broomstick, flying around, going off to meet the devil was a big thing. So there was this idea, and it's interesting. It's very hard because it doesn't allow us to have access to these women who are called witches and find out what they actually thought about it. But there are a lot of accounts of witchcraft by men in the past, in like the 16th century, where they talk about flying ointments and they give recipes for flying ointments. So these are a mix of plants and other substances, some of which are unbelievably ghoulish, like the fat of babies, which would be mixed together. And in the most wild versions of these stories, they would create this salve, which would be applied. The witches would apparently apply onto themselves. I don't know how graphic we were allowed to get in this podcast, but basically the broomstick. They use the broomstick to apply the salve to a part of the body where absorption is good.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Right. So they're sitting on the broomstick. And they put the flying ointment onto the broomstick. It's...
So this is the story the men made up?
This is the story when you read these witchcraft, accounts of witchcraft in the past, this is the tale that we're told, that women were making these substances up and turning them into this kind of fatty salve that would be then applied to a broomstick, and they'd go and fly off and meet the devil. Now, obviously, us modern readers are thinking, obviously that didn't happen.
Yeah.
However, I like a lot of these stories. I imagine that there is a grain of truth in there. And the grain of truth, I think, this is my theory anyway, is that women, as the head of the household, had access and knowledge and understanding of plants. And they use them in cooking and in household medicine to make their lives better and easier. Mm-hmm. So they would have had knowledge of these plants.
They would have made, they were all herbalists. They would have made...
There's a substance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a substance called Dual, which was known as a sleeping draught. We would call it a kind of crude anesthetic, which would be given to people if they were really unwell or in a lot of pain. And it contained things like black henbane and opium poppy and various other things, mandrake as well, which is also in the book. And so obviously that sort of eased the pain for these people, sent them off into a lovely other place while they were in a lot of pain, sometimes dying or sometimes recovering from a horrific injury or so on. So you can imagine that these women maybe had enough knowledge to maybe be self-medicating with some of these substances to maybe get out of the horrific reality of their moment in history, and have a little moment to themselves.
Yeah.
That's my theory anyway, that maybe their understanding of plants meant that, yes, maybe they were getting a little bit high now and again. And actually
flying in a different way.
They were flying in a different way. Yeah. So that's kind of my theory about it. And obviously, we're never going to know. And academics will go back and forth on a lot of this stuff over and over again. But yeah, I think women were the main users and the people who understood a lot of these plants in a sort of domestic context. Therefore, it's no surprise that they knew, okay, if we take this plant, you're going to fall asleep and you're going to feel drowsy, or if you take this plant, you're going to have hallucinations or whatever. They understood how to use them.
Or when my kid is sick, this is what I put,
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever.
So from the very benign to the much more serious, this knowledge would have been passed down to women to use. And so I think that's my understanding of it, that obviously the tale that's come through from history is very, very skewed, but actually women understood plants. And I'm sure, in the past, lots of plant-based murders were happening that really we have no way of knowing about, because
we have no way of knowing.
Until fairly recently, you couldn't test for these things. So, strychnine, for example, another plant in the book, another tree in the book, was rat poison. People could buy it over the counter as rat poison, but it also killed a lot of people, because you could buy it over the counter and then people would give it to somebody they wanted to kill. However, now strychnine is very limited as a murder weapon, because it's really obvious when somebody has been given strychnine, because you get these extreme spasms. This is in one of the Sherlock Holmes books, actually. I can't remember which one now, but you have this really extreme spasm which leads to death, and you end up in this, and this word I could never say, opisthotonus, that's it, opisthotonus, which is where you go into this arch that's so severe that your whole body is arched over, and that's what happens when you get poisoned with strychnine. So not surprisingly, if you find somebody and they've had these spasms, it's like, okay, it's strychnine. So
Yeah.
people moved away from using that particular poison for good reason, because it's
How to
easy
do
to
Lily of the
detect.
Valley instead, like Walter White.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the other thing to say is that the difficulty for doctors when somebody turns up with symptoms at the hospital that could be many other things, a lot of the
Yeah,
symptoms are very
very
like
similar.
across the, happen. Either your pupils dilate or they go get bigger or get smaller. There's different ways of looking at it, but unless somebody can say, well, yes, I had a salad of lily of the valley, oftentimes it's a bit of a detective journey for doctors to work things out. And in fact, plant poisoning now, it really is quite a small minority of overall poisonings. You're much more likely to be poisoned by carbon monoxide, illegal drugs,
Right. There's way more chemicals now too.
chemicals, household chemicals. You're
Back
going to
then
get
it was
poisoned
just
by
plants,
those.
right? Back then it
Yeah.
was just plants. Now there's a smorgasbord. But
Yes.
you have shared so many fascinating stories, and like I said, every book you've written is so thoroughly researched. Like you've shared probably 0.1% of the research
Yeah.
that you did, and then also the interesting stories and all these profiles. And the book is beautifully executed. The illustrations are beautiful. The plant profiles are so fascinating. So if people want to get the book and learn
Yes.
some fun facts like these that you shared to share at parties, where can they get the book? And also where can
Yes.
they find your work on Scribehound?
Yeah. So this book is being published by Greenfinch, and it is available which is an imprint of Quercus. So it's available in the US and everywhere else, hopefully, on all the usual platforms. So you should be able to get hold of this one. The Atlas of Deadly Plants by me, and I'm also doing an audiobook of this book. So you can get that on next week. It'll hopefully, cross fingers, be up on Audible and Spotify, and it'll also be up on my Patreon for Patreon subscribers.
Amazing.
So there's different ways of accessing it. But yeah, it was really, really fun to write, and it's just made me in awe of all of these incredible plants, which, as I say, the amazing thing was almost every single one, as well as having a poisonous profile, was useful in some kind of way. It could be as a wood, it could be as a medicine, it could be as, there was one plant which is used as a mattress stuffing. It's the fibers of its seeds. So there's so many useful plants in here, but it hopefully will teach people to respect plants as well. And if you want to look at Scribehound gardening, we have an app which you can download. There's information on my website and on my Instagram about how to get involved in Scribehound. I think the first month is £1. So for just £1, you can access all these different writers, including me. And there's so much content already on there. All these archives of these incredible garden writers. So you can try it out for £1
Amazing.
and give it a go and see what you think. And there's a link on my Instagram for that.
Yeah, we'll make sure to link to your personal stuff and then Scribehound and the book. But
Sure.
it is such a pleasure, as always, to talk to you, my friend. And also, we'll have to have you back to celebrate when you relaunch your self-published book to do more houseplant profiles.
Absolutely. Yeah, houseplants still have my heart. Don't worry.
Yeah,
There
me
are
too.
a couple of houseplants in this book as well, so we haven't completely abandoned it, but as I say,
expanding our horizons.
Expanding our horizons. All plants are fascinating, right? That's the bottom line.
Yeah. All plants are awesome. That's all. We just want you learning about plants, in whatever
Exactly.
capacity, for sure.
Growing joy.